Michael, if we're going to tell the story of Hemingway in Michigan, where would we begin?
Well, how about with a 6-week-old baby who's brought by his parents to the wilderness to decide where they wanted to put their cottage? I mean, that's really where Hemingway's Michigan connection begins. You could figure it ended in 1921 when he was married by Lake Charlevoix at Horton Bay, honeymooned at the family cottage, and then would move on to Paris and Ezra Pound and F. Scott Fitzgerald and Gertrude Stein and fame. But that window between 1899 and 1921 would have been the years that he would have spent at least a portion of every single summer in Michigan.
The Hemingway family did in fact own a cottage on Walloon Lake. The cottage, they named it Windemere. It wasn't much. I mean, we tend to think of this as some sort of elaborate summer home. Basically, it was a 20 by 40 foot building with a couple of bedrooms, a fireplace, and a kitchen. One of the things we always talk about Ernest Hemingway as a youth in Michigan is that he wasn't famous. We think of Ernest Hemingway as a Nobel laureate. They thought of him as Dr. Hemingway's kid.
Nobody knew who he was. They didn't care who he was. He was the son of a middle-class doctor and a mother who was domineering and opinionated and musically inclined. She would claim she gave up her career in music to raise a family. And so I think his mother was as strong-willed as he was. I think that she took him to museums and art galleries and gained an appreciation for things that otherwise wouldn't have been a part of his life. His father took him on nature walks, taught him to observe and look for things and compare what they saw when they came back, which I think is a skill that Hemingway employed in his writing for the rest of his life. He graduated high school in 1917. 1918, went off to the First World War as an ambulance driver, was there for about a month, and was in the wrong place at the wrong time and was hit with mortar fire and machine gun fire. He recouped in a hospital in Milan, came back home, and began to try to put his life back together again. We talk a lot these days about post-traumatic stress. Ernest Hemingway was the poster child for post-traumatic stress, but he came back also clinging to the hope of a relationship that he had formed with his nurse. And in late March, he received a letter saying, "Sorry, kid, it wasn't meant to be. Good luck." The place he came to seek solace was Michigan. It's where he came to heal. He hunted, he fished, and most of anything, he hung out with his friends and tried to make life normal, tried to return to the normal rhythms. And then the decision in the fall that he would be a writer. And so Ernest took a room in Petoskey and came and focused on being a writer. He would meet a girl in Chicago and decide to get married, and they did so not in Oak Park, not in St. Louis where she was from, but decided to get married in northern Michigan at Horton Bay. From there he went on to Paris, and the story goes that he tacked a map of Michigan on the wall, and he began to write stories about what he knew best. And what he knew best, what he felt best, was northern Michigan. And so he's in the City of Lights hanging out with F. Scott Fitzgerald and Gertrude Stein, and he's writing about Kalkaska and Mansalona, and he's writing about Petoskey, and he's writing about the experiences of a young boy who thinks he's got life figured out but doesn't. And these stories were new in style and caught the attention of the press and caught attention of other authors and publishers who began to support him. These short stories often featured a character named Nick Adams, who happened to be a young boy who summered in northern Michigan, whose father just happened to be a doctor, whose mother just happened to be a little overbearing. But Ernest would say to his dying days, Nick Adams was not me.
Ernest and the family, like any family, had issues and difficulties. They loved one another at times, and there were times when they didn't like each other at all. He had siblings he was particularly close to. He had siblings which, truthfully, he probably wasn't all that fond of as a child, and as they matured, things did not get better. Ernest Hemingway would forever hold his mother responsible for his father's death. His father committed suicide. He was bitter towards his mother. He made no bones about that. On the other hand, he was a dutiful son. His mother needed financial support, and he created the trust that paid for the last 20 years of her life.
he used the money he got from the film rights to the first adaptation of A Farewell to Arms to set up a trust fund for his mother. And in return, she gave him Windemere Cottage. And so Hemingway would take possession of Windemere in about 1930 and would own it until his death in 1961. He married in 1921 in northern Michigan and then would not come back until the 40s. And he made one trip and he came into Petoskey and he looked up friends and they offered to have him go out to the family cottage. And he said, no, I don't want to. He said, my experience has been, in essence, to return to places they're never the same. They're never right. And I don't want to spoil the memory that I have of that place. A lot of people like to say that Michigan was pivotal not only because it gave him the experiences that he wrote about, but also became the subject matter of his earliest, and some might argue even the best writing that he did.
I think it influenced him quite a bit. I mean, it made him the outdoorsman that he is. It certainly must have added to his sense of rugged individualism, his mystique of manliness or whatever. I'm sure that he picked a lot of that up.
One of our other board members brought in a whole bunch of these fishing magazines one time from 1895 to 1910. And the language that's in the fishing magazines from 1895 to 1910 is Hemingway-style prose. And so what he points out is that sporting magazines of the early 20th century write in a style that is very reminiscent to what is Hemingway's literary style. It just happens that Ernest Hemingway, that style, he could twist it and put it into another literary end, and the whole world gets exposed to it.
Ernest Hemingway obviously went on to much broader horizons than he ever enjoyed on Walloon Lake or Horton's Bay. But that bay, that lake, never really left him. He always had the same fascinations. He always had the same driving forces. As a boy, he had to learn how to do things. And if you look at how he writes, when Ernest Hemingway has to write a book, he has to learn how to do it. He can't pretend, he can't fake, he has to know the background. He's drawing on the stories and the people he knew about. And he begins to tell truth as he understands it. So this is the beginning of a world famous author. This is where it starts.